มชันลึกคืนนี้สนทนากับผู้นำผิวดำที่ดังที่สุดของอเมริกาครับสาธุคุณเจสซี่แจ็กสันคนนี้ไม่ธรรมดาครับในอเมริกานั้นทุกคนรู้จักเขาเพราะว่าเขาได้สร้างชื่อเสียงทางด้านของการเป็นผู้นำทางการเมืองที่โดดเด่นที่สุดในแวดวงของคนผิวดำเคยเป็นผู้ช่วยมือขวาของมาร์ตินลูเทอร์คิงซึ่งเป็นผู้นำคนผิวดำที่ถูกสังหารไปและก็จารึกในประวัติศาสตร์แต่ว่าสาธุคุณเจสซี่แจ็กสันนั้นเป็นคนที่มองครับว่าวันหนึ่งเขาอาจจะเป็นผู้สมัครรับเลือกตั้งตำแหน่งประธานาธิบดีครั้งที่3ในชีวิตเขาก็ได้2 ครั้งก็คือคศ1984ครั้งหนึ่ง1988อีกครั้งหนึ่งถึงแม้ว่าพรรคเดโมแครตของเขาจะไม่เลือกเขาขึ้นมาเป็นตัวแทนเพื่อจะแข่งกับริพับลิกันในตำแหน่งประธานาธิบดีแต่ว่า2 ครั้งนั้นก็สร้างความเกลียวกราวฮือฮาครับเพราะว่าครั้งแรกนั้นเขาได้เสียงถึง 3.8 ล้านครั้งที่2นั้นเขาได้ถึง7 ล้านเสียงแสดงว่าบารมีทางการเมืองของเจสซี่แจ็กสันนั้นกำลังพุ่งขึ้นมาการมาเมืองไทยคราวนี้จะมาวิพากษ์วิจารณ์เกี่ยวกับบทบาทของอเมริกาในอิรักและบทบาทของอเมริกาทั้งโลกครับแน่นอนรวมทั้งในภูมิภาคเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้นี้ด้วยเจสซี่แจ็กสันเป็นนักพูดเป็นคนที่มีความคิดความอ่านสามารถนำอย่างน้อยที่สุดคนผิวดำในอเมริกาและคนผิวขาวจำนวนไม่น้อยที่มองว่าเขานั้นเป็นตัวแทนของความพยายามต่อสู้กับยาเสพติดต่อสู้เพื่อคนรุ่นหนุ่มสาวต่อสู้เพื่อความเป็นธรรมของสีผิวเคยไปเจอกับผู้นำคิวบาฟิเดลคาสโตรเคยไปเจอกับซัดดัม ฮุสเซนของอิรักสมัยสงครามอ่าวเปอร์เซียครั้งที่1เพื่อไปขอให้ซัดดัมนั้นปล่อยฐานอเมริกันที่ถูกจับไปตอนนั้นไปที่คิวบาก็ไปจับไม้จับมือกับศัตรูหมายเลข1ของอเมริกาอย่างคาสโตรแล้วก็แน่นอนครับในอเมริกาเองนั้นเขามีองค์กรที่สามารถระดมคนเป็นล้านคนได้เมื่อเกี่ยวข้องกับประเด็นว่าด้วยสีผิวว่าด้วยความเป็นธรรมของสังคมและว่าด้วยอนาคตของอเมริกาครับฉะนั้นวันนี้เราซักถามสาธุคุณเจสซี่แจ็กสันคนที่ใครต่อใครก็อยากจะรู้ว่าเขาคนนี้จะเป็นผู้นำอเมริกาต่อไปหรือไม่ความคิดความอ่านของเขามีอิทธิพลต่อคนอเมริกันมากพอที่เราจะต้องสนใจทุกคำตอบของเขาในคืนวันนี้ครับReverend Jesse Jackson, if you were to meet President Bush today, what would your advice be to him on the Iraq later situation?
Well, he must no longer underestimate the Iraqi people's resistance to the invasion and the occupation. Mm-hmm. The invasion and the occupation was not welcomed by them. Mm-hmm. There was no mass outcry for America to come and save Iraq. Mm-hmm. And so now we find ourselves in an expensive, deadly invasion occupation. Mm-hmm. And maybe we should look at the mistake of how it got in. Yeah. We went in unilaterally, ignoring the advice of our German and French and Chinese allies, mm-hmm. Threatening to undermine the UN. We chose to go it alone. Mm-hmm. And now we are there alone, but it is a very difficult stay. We should try to convince France and Germany, mm-hmm. under the rubric of the UN, to partner with us But they will only do it if they can share power and share responsibility. And then to accept the outcome of Iraqi self-determination. We cannot determine the outcome of the Iraqi election.
Right.
And right now we're trying to determine the outcome of the election. We're trying to involve France and Germany and China without cutting them into the power equation. It will not work. So that would be my appeal to him today, to know that
Go back to the French and the German and the Chinese, not necessarily through the United Nations.
well, certainly on the rubric of the UN. Matter of fact, if you're in a deep hole and it's dark, don't look for another shovel, look for a rope and some light.
You think Bush is now plunging even deeper?
Going deeper because more Americans are dying and more Iraqis are dying and being wounded every day. In America, there are 6,000 wounded soldiers, and it's almost never told to the American public. There's no sense of how deep it has become. It is the bloodiest conflict since the Vietnam conflict. It is a very bloody conflict. And just as there's no preparation for the transition in Iraq, there's no transition for the Americans who come back home wounded. Many of them are in unfit barracks. Some in Fort Stewart, Georgia, don't have outdoor toilets. Some have not yet had their medical assessments. Some have had the assessments of surgery but lined up and can't yet get surgery. Others of them, because of their disgust with the politics and their predicament, they're prepared to be soldiers, not to be policemen. And so some of them are inflicting wounds upon themselves.
But President Bush may say...
They fear getting killed. My point is that is a story that's somewhat untold. The number of self-inflicted wounds, the number of suicide, the number of AWOL. It really is a low morale issue.
But President Bush might say that if the American troops retreat now, it might give encouragement to the terrorists.
Well, you know, that was a rationale used for so long about Vietnam.
Right.
And the longer we stayed, the more we got killed. Because somehow our military might was not greater than the will of the people to determine their own destiny. So now you have Ho Chi Minh City as opposed to Lyndon Baines Johnson City, because the people's will to determination in the end prevailed. In this case, Iraq, a 7,000-year-old civilization, is difficult to occupy.
Right.
And now what we really need to look at is we need allies to convince the Iraqis that we support their own right to self-determination. We cannot do this without France and without Germany and without China under the UN rubric. And so there must be a change of assessment if we're to come out of there. Because, as you know, Americans are now being killed in the double digits. And the targets are so organized. I mean, last week, an attack upon the hotel,
Right.
Wolfowitz was there.
Right.
That suggested inside information. It takes a lot of precise intelligence to know his schedule. And now the helicopter's shot down. That means somebody knew that they were leaving at a certain time. 15 killed and many others are injured. So there's a tremendous revolt against our presence in that country.
Do you suspect this is the people who are supporting Saddam Hussein alone, or do you think the Al-Qaeda organization is also behind it?
I think it could be even broader in the sense that America is a great and a God-blessed nation. We're 400 years old. Iraq is 7,000. And they do not see themselves as being occupied by America, no matter what its military and economic might be. There's a tremendous upsurge, seems to me, of pride there, which I think we underestimate. When I was there in 1990, and I met with Saddam Hussein, because he was going to use 600 women as human shields. Women from America and France and Britain and Canada. And I convinced him to let the women go. He said to me, well, before you leave, come go with me down to Babylon, which is 60 miles from Baghdad. So I said, no, I really want to go, because I didn't want him to change his mind. He said they could go.
Right.
He began to talk about Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
And so he saw himself in the lineage of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon and those ancient civilizations.
Right.
So his frame of reference and the Iraqi people's frame of reference is like 7,000 years. Ours is like 400 years. So
He's
this
just a kid. He's saying that the Americans are just little kids, young kids.
in the family of nations,
Yeah.
in the history of the family of nations. And so I think we're underestimating our foe. Again, it was a short military battle because we have the superior air power. There were no weapons of mass destruction. There was no air power competition. There was no imminent threat. There was no Al-Qaeda connection that's been established. And so we were misled in that trap in the first place. On the first go round, we spent a lot of money apparently buying up some military officers.
Right.
And getting them to surrender. And so that layer of Iraqi resistance is gone. But there is a deeper level, it seems. Not only people within Iraq, but now it seems that Iraq has become the gravitational center for Muslim resistance and resistance from around the world.
For all anti-American elements, whether they are pro or against Saddam Hussein, but they're all now in Iraq because you are the target. Is that right?
That's right. At least when Saddam Hussein was there, we knew what the entity of government was. We occupied 60% of the airspace. So Iraq was contained. It couldn't go toward Iran. It was not going to attack Iran. It was not going to attack Syria. They couldn't attack Europe. They couldn't get to the U.S. So containment was enough. But somehow Mr. Bush went from containing to invading and now occupying. It's proven to be a very expensive, divisive, dangerous mission.
But President Bush can also say this is preemptive strike for the U.S. If you don't strike them first, they will do another September 11 on you.
There's no evidence that they did September 11th on us in the first place. There is evidence that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban struck us, and we knew, our intelligence said that they could do it, which we did not act upon, and we knew the Taliban because they had been our ally. We knew bin Laden because he'd been our ally as we supported him and the Taliban against the Russians in the battle of Chechnya. We knew who they were.
Right.
Matter of fact, we had just given the Taliban like $60 million the May before the September 11th hit as our anti-drug partner.
Right.
So we knew who they were, we knew where they were. Now, the reason we could not strike them immediately after September 11th, Mr. Bush's isolationist policies had us unable to get world support. We had said to Europeans on the Kyoto Environmental Treaty, our way or the highway would push the Europeans off. We had refused to go to the UN conference on racism in South Africa. Would push them off. And so that kind of policy had us in conflict with some of our allies. But once we were hit in such an ugly way.
So you're not sure who hit you on September 11 yet?
No, we were very sure we did not have the coalition to hit back.
Right.
But once we made it clear what had happened, who had done it, Cuba joined in the coalition. Libya joined in the coalition. Non-aligned countries joined in the coalition. The NATO allies, the UN itself, the whole world said no to the Al-Qaeda hit on America that day because that phenomena could spread. So we had a global coalition against terrorism. In some sense,
And that faded away after
Mr.
Afghanistan.
Bush pulled out and decided to go to Iraq alone. And the evidence is that we had decided to go and hit Iraq before the UN report even came back. It was great preparation to hit Iraq. Many think it was Operation Iraq Liberation, Operation Oil, our hegemony over the region. Some say it was hitting Iraq now. If you stop Iraq, then you have a clear roadmap to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. None of that has worked out, just none of it. And to that extent, today we're in a situation now where we are less secure today than we were a year ago.
Aren't you happy that Saddam Hussein is gone from Iraq?
Well,
Or gone from the top position in Iraq? He may still be in Iraq for all we know.
we do not know where he is. And
But are you happy or not that he's no more in power?
I'm glad he's not in power, but I'm not glad the way it happened. Because the way this happened, we have thrown out the baby and the bathwater at the same time. We're now in a mess. At least when Saddam Hussein was there was a known entity. That was a government infrastructure that we could contain in many ways. We could contain, we could control. Now we don't know. Now he is a mystery. He was a known entity. Now he is a mystery. We then knew where his airplanes were. We knew where his military power was. We knew what weapons he had because we had the receipts.
Right.
We sold them to him. We knew what he had, and we knew who he was and where he was. No matter how many palaces he had, we knew where he was.
Right.
But now it is either the ghost of Saddam Hussein or the mystique of Saddam Hussein or many other forces that we have no idea where they are. And that's why we are mystified because we are fighting in a vacuum without a known quantity. So it's not enough to say I'm glad Saddam Hussein. I hope that tyrants everywhere leave and that tyranny everywhere ends. But the way that you fight tyranny is not to use tyranny to fight it. There must be some real commitment to diplomacy and tough-minded diplomacy. Diplomacy, economic assistance, ally development, patience, these virtues matter in resolving conflicts between nations. Patience, economic relations, aid, trade, containment, these virtues matter.
You met Saddam in 1991, and you managed to get him to release some Americans. How do you like him as a person?
Well, he released some women from America and from Britain and France and Canada. I did not meet him long enough to assess like or dislike. I knew who he was.
What was your first impression?
And I knew he had the power to either keep them or to release them. I knew that. I also knew that Saddam Hussein had an interest in surviving. I was more interested in trying to categorize how to get the people out and possibly stop and try to get the women out of Iraq and get Saddam out of Kuwait. That was more my interest in determining the inner stuff that made him. I mean, I didn't go to play golf with him or to play tennis.
Right.
So I don't know what all was the makeup of his person. What I do know is that once we talked, I convinced him to allow me to go to Kuwait to bring some people out who were down there holed up in that hotel. I do know that I convinced him to let these women go, and he did. To that extent, for me, it was mission accomplished.
So he used you to boost his international image, or you used him?
It may have been mutual use.
You used him, or he used you?
Well, it may be mutual in the sense that I used his power to gain the release of the women.
Right.
And that was a big deal. He used our presence to say, I can negotiate.
Yes.
Now, our government ignored that signal of the ability to negotiate, because if I could get those women out, surely our government could negotiate, if it had the will to do so, to get him back to a line out of Kuwait. He was wrong for going into Kuwait. We were right to drive him back. We drove him back, and that was a mission accomplished. We did not go all the way. Some suggest that George W. Bush's motivation is the unfinished business of driving him out.
That's right.
Or reacting to his attempt to assassinate his father. But those reasons were not reasons given for the invasion. It was weapons of mass destruction, imminent threat, Al-Qaeda connection.
Or you could expect Bush Jr. to say, I'm going to fight Saddam to revenge for my father, obviously. So he had to say something.
That's right, because that would not have been an acceptable
or to finish
reason.
my father's mission.
Yeah, well, now that mission is not being accomplished very well, and Americans and Iraqis are being killed, Americans and Iraqis are being wounded, and the country has been torn asunder. But now we are meeting something we did not expect, tremendous resistance. Walking through Iraq without bombs falling and blowing up buildings was a relatively simple scientific thing to do. But now this guerrilla warfare tactics that they're using has proven to be effective against us, unfortunately, and devastating.
People say this is the second Vietnam. Do you agree with that?
It takes on those characteristics because we assume Vietnam was an easy prey after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. We had superior soldiers with the equipment and the uniforms and the weapons, and we were going to stop, the communism. We were going to stop the domino effect, and so we were given a rationale to go into South Vietnam. Then we couldn't determine the North Vietnamese from the South Vietnamese. Then we couldn't handle the weather in the jungles. Then at some point we were losing so many soldiers, our will to fight was not as strong as their will to self-determine themselves. So in the end, we had to back out of Vietnam because we could not win that war because it was endless. And the Vietnamese's will to fight, and their sense of purpose was greater than ours, it seemed. Now we're in an Iraq situation where the will of the Iraqis is substantial, and the will of Muslims, because it's no longer just an Iraqi resistance, it is a kind of Muslim resistance. No matter, that may not have been our motivation.
Right.
We have unleashed this Muslim anti-American jihad that's proven to be awesome, and right now it's contained in Iraq, but of course it didn't start. It started in New York. It started in Pennsylvania. Now we see hits in Indonesia, hits in the Philippines. So right now we're fighting a phantom, faceless adversary.
You see down the road a similar situation in Vietnam will happen, and that is that American soldiers will have to pull out and accept defeat.
Well, we would never spend it that way. I can only say that in the end, we can't stay. And right now we can't leave. That is the quagmire. And the only...
Why can't you leave?
Well, to leave now would be to accept a defeat that this administration is not going to accept, nor really I think even the American public will accept. But then if you leave, you also leave our Iraqi allies who are going to fight with us. You leave them at the hands of forces that could destroy them. You really could unleash within that country a process of fratricide or even genocide that could be devastating. It would be dishonorable.
So your solution would be not to leave, but to bring in the United Nations?
Yeah, it would be dishonorable just to leave because the many people that took a risk and joined us against Saddam and the Ba'ath Party. Now, to pull out now would be to open up for a bloodbath. So we really cannot leave.
So what is your proposed way out of this?
That we must convince France and Germany and China to be our ally. We must do so under the rubric of the UN. The U.S. is seen as an occupying force. The UN could be seen as a liberating force. The UN is not seen as a liberating force. It's seen as an occupying force. The occupying force will never have moral authority. The UN, because it did not sanction the invasion, has maintained its moral authority. So the UN will become, no matter how irreverent we were toward the UN, calling it irrelevant, the UN emerges and remains the strongest moral force for global peace in the world today.
The aftermath of the Iraq War is a very significant change in American foreign policy. The top priority of your foreign policy now is anti-terrorism. And everywhere you go, you ask whether your friend is on your side or not. If you're not on our side, you are
evil.
Evil, you're on your enemy.
And that kind of language has been quite divisive in the world. I mean, North Korea, evil empire, and Iraq, evil empire. I mean, those make good headlines in America. They're very threatening headlines to the countries that are targeted in that way.
Yes.
It turns whole nations of people against America. We're seen on our best days as land of the free, who welcome immigrants and home of the brave. And we're seen as the country with the open arms, multiracial, multicultural society. But now we're seen as being on the offensive, calling people evil and preemptive strikes, and using our military for suspect reasons. Is it democracy that we seek, or is it the oil that we seek?
Right.
Is it peace we seek, or hegemony that we seek? I mean, we've been seen as a very different force in the world today, and it has us in a very isolated position. We are a great nation, a blessed nation. We're just 6% of the human race. We're just 6%. America is a minority language. English is a minority language in our own country. 2/3 of our nation, of our hemisphere, speak Spanish. Another 200 in Portugal. I mean, in Brazil, speak Portuguese.
Yes.
Often I look at how we see the world. We see the world through a keyhole, and not through a door. And half of all human beings are Asian, and half of them are Chinese. 1/8 of the human race is African. 1/4 is Nigerian. There are 1 billion people in India, twice more than the U.S. and Russia combined.
But you have the biggest armies, armed forces.
But somehow the resistance of the people's insistence upon self-determination is greater than those armies. And my point is, most people in the world today are yellow, are brown, are black, non-Christian, poor, female, young, and don't speak English. And the 1/6 has a strong hold on weapons and resources.
Right.
The 5/6 find themselves in poverty and without drinkable water, without health care. And this gap between those who live in the surplus culture, the top 1/6, and the bottom 5/6, must give way to a thorough distribution of resources. The way to fight the roots of terrorism, which is the anger and the desperation, is a commitment to feed more people, more drinkable water, more health care, more education. When people have something to conserve, they become conservative. The people who don't have drinkable water and don't have a decent house, don't have an education, they have nothing to conserve.
So you sense that rising anti-American feelings around the world now. You can sense it very clearly, right?
Well, we can sense
especially after a brief sort of period of sympathy with the U.S. after September 11. But
when you call Iraq and North Korea and these countries evil, you create
rogue states.
Rogue state. Then, in such a categorization, it's kind of undiplomatic language, you see? And then you don't go to the UN Conference on Racism in South Africa, of all places.
Yep.
And then you take that blow. Then you go to Europe, and Condoleezza Rice said, on the key of the treaty, our way or the highway. So all these isolationist moves are not good. And they put us in a position where the world is not saying, you're fighting Iraq, go for it.
Yes.
And people in other countries are not going to join us for the right to die and the right to spend money without the
do
right.
most Americans understand that the current trend is quite anti-American in many parts of the world?
Americans are beginning to come to grips with it slowly. You see, the reason why the demonstrations in Europe and around the world were much bigger against this war, because the press was free to tell the story. Much of the American press had become so close to the government and trying to gain favor from the government, it became embedded with, in the bed with the government.
In the bed.
In the bed with, and could not see the ramifications of this war. Today, for example, American soldiers come back home in the caskets. The press is not allowed to cover it for fear it will affect how Americans see the war.
Really?
When they come back wounded, many of them come back in the dark. There's 6,000 wounded American soldiers today from that war, many of whom cannot get medical assessments.
Yes.
They cannot get their surgery. Many of them, with all the money spent on the war, the American wounded veterans are being treated, very shabbily, for example.
Yeah.
There's all this. When these 15 soldiers come back home who were killed yesterday,
Yeah.
there's a blockade. The American press cannot cover their coming back, which would enrage a lot of people. And the Pentagon will not release their pictures to the American press to cover it. So people are beginning to sense something now is not
Quite right.
It's not quite right. They know 15 killed, 3 killed, 2 killed. But since the daily dying, so I think the American press has now become much more curious and now maybe much more aggressive in covering the ramifications of this war. And now you get $87 billion more dollars while you essentially have no domestic economic growth program at home.
Right.
Or we've had a net loss of jobs in every state. We've gone from surplus to deficit in our economy. And jobs are going down, tuition costs going up, jobs, the poverty base is expanding. So you've got these kind of bad news dynamics inside our economy at home. So why should we spend $87 billion in Iraq for reconstruction, roads and bridges and hospitals and schools, and at home our children are trapped in second-class schools and first-class
But on the
jails.
other hand, the American people also must be feeling quite insecure, waiting for the next terrorist act to come to their home too. So this is sort of a dilemma that on the one hand you live in fear, on the other you don't want to fight a war.
Well, that is true. Matter of fact, last week it was a fire in Chicago. It was a really tragic fire. 6 people were killed. And it seems that since every American building, every building now has security guards and has machines to test whether you have weapons of any sort. Every airport, every federal building, every corporate building is now on the watch. I mean, the whole new industry of hiring security guards to protect buildings all over the country.
Yeah.
So you remind every time you go in a building, you remind it that this is because something might happen. But what happened in this case is because of fear of people moving in and out, they locked the hallway, the doors to the hallways, and the fire broke out on a floor high up. People couldn't get downstairs because the doors were locked. Locked because of a fear of terrorism, but they got trapped in the fire.
Yeah.
So much of our freedom has been sacrificed in this. Then Mr. Ashcroft, Attorney General, draconian laws reducing civil liberties, the right to arrest people without charges, the detainees in Guantanamo, that which we're fighting for, we're taken away at home. So it's created some great anxiety and anger at home. So at this point, we need a new direction. Our foreign policy is not working for us. We're not more secure. And our economy simply is not growing. Last few days, there was something about the economy is growing, but jobs are leaving.
Third quarter is a 7% growth. You don't think that was real?
Well, but growth is like a boom for whom? Boom for whom?
What's your answer to that?
Well, if the economy is growing, but you're still losing jobs, it must be growing for those who've been benefiting all the while.
Yes.
Mr. Bush came in office and $1.5 trillion surplus and gave half of it to the top 1%. Well, they are growing.
Yes.
But the rest of America, the middle class, is losing jobs. The poverty base is expanding, and it keeps watering the leaves, the elites, and not watering the roots. It is as if we are turning our back on the values of the American Revolution. It's like we become the British in the scenario. And we often ally with, quote unquote, the British of that season in these fights. We allied with the landed gentry. We allied with the aristocracy. We allied with the military and seemed to abandon those values that made for the American Revolution in the first place. But I'm convinced if America can lead the world by our values of caring, inclusion, open, free, fair press, public education, public health, we can lead the world through our values. We cannot intimidate the world with our guns. We can lead the world with our values.
But that's not what is happening now.
Right now, we're trying to lead by our guns, and our strong suit is not our weapons.
If things are so,
our strong suit is that people from around the world can come to America and get an education. You come and get a decent house, to come to a growing economy. So they can come and see labor laws for workers and child labor laws to protect children.
Right.
So in a real sense, our values represent our strongest weapon. But right now we're using our weakest weapon, frankly, which is our guns.
If things are so bad in America, why aren't you running for president this time?
Well, I chose to mobilize. There are some very outstanding people running for presidency. I've chosen to try to organize a peace movement within our country and join others in that process, to organize workers, to fight for greater resources for public education and for public health, to build a movement of people, in some sense, to revive their faith in themselves, revive their confidence. And in another 12 months, there will be another election.
Yep.
And those forces who won in 2000 can win again. Something odd happened in America in 2000. In this instance, the Supreme Court selected a president.
All right.
Ordinarily, an American president should select the Supreme Court.
Right.
This time, the loser won and the winner lost. We turned democracy on its head. That must not happen again in 2004.
But you still haven't answered my question. Why aren't you running this time?
I ran twice, and I chose to serve another way.
84 and 88 you ran.
84 and 88, and the good news is we built a massive coalition of people.
Yes, you stir things up. You got new registered voters.
New registered voters.
You won, 3.5 million votes?
The first time around, 7 million the second time.
Yes.
And
so if you run again, you may get, 10, 15 million?
Well, could maybe
Why do you
get
stop
more.
here?
Well, in 92, Bill Clinton ran. We felt that he had a good chance of winning, and we were right in 96. Because part of my reason for running was to motivate people to get more involved.
Right.
To bring in a generation of young people who otherwise had grown alienated, and ethnic minorities who had grown alienated. And we achieved that mission. And out of that came a whole lot of people who ran for office for the first time and won,
Right.
who learned the science of politics. So I feel good about that season. And I must say that while doing that, I was able to further Dr. King's mission of trying to be a peacemaker. And that's why going to Syria to get Lieutenant Robert Goodman freed, who was there as a prisoner of war, was a part of our work. Getting Americans and others out of Cuba who were in jail. Some had been there 25 years.
You also met Fidel Castro.
And at that time, met Fidel Castro. It does not stand to reason, by the way, that we'll talk with China and not will talk with Cuba on ideological grounds. That's totally irrational. We brought Americans home from Iraq.
Yes.
We brought soldiers home from Yugoslavia. So we've continued our work, but not just in the form of running for the presidency. We've never stopped fighting for peace in the world and justice at home. And really, that's why I'm here. I'm delighted to be in Thailand. This is just a wonderful place to be, and a great part of the world in which to be. I mean, so much is happening in Asia, frankly.
And you're ashamed that this is your first time in Thailand?
In Thailand.
You should have been here before, right?
Should have been here before. Should have been invited before by you.
Okay.
And thank you very much.
All right.
But I've been to Indonesia.
No, before we talk about your mission here, do you still deep down dream of being president of the United States one day?
No, I do not.
No?
If that were my dream, I'd still be pursuing it. I'm not doing that.
You have stopped pursuing that?
Yeah, but
Would there be any circumstances that would change your mind?
I don't know of any.
If the party is so weak, they cannot get a strong candidate, say, 4 years from now.
I think
Because a lot of
I think it's highly unlikely the party will ever turn to someone to save it, because there are a lot of leaders who are running and raising issues and raising money and building constituencies, and so I do not think that there's such a desperation, because there are some very good people running.
this current crop of 9 candidates.
This current crop, the top tier of those who are running, whether it is Dean or Kerry or Clark or Gephardt, these are very able people who have track records of service. And in this instance, they have in Bush a huge target. If the question is asked, are you better off 4 years later? Folks will have to say no. You lost 192,000 jobs in Texas alone. Are you better off 4 years later? You've gone from surplus to deficit. Are you better off? Is the world more at peace? I mean, so I think that Bush, I know he is quite vulnerable.
You think Bush can be beaten?
Again.
Bush
Again. He was beaten the last time.
Okay, you still insist that he lost the election.
Not insist.
It should have been Al Gore,
Gore
right?
got the most votes. And really, the Supreme Court did an extraordinary thing. They stopped the count. He won by less than 1,000 votes.
Yeah.
Because DeVal County had 27,000 votes. They stopped the count. Blacks from Florida A&M and Bethune-Cookman,
Right.
their votes were not counted. Haitian Americans, many of them, votes were not counted. So he won by virtue of a vote being stopped.
Right.
So he did not win the most votes and really did not win Florida. But through a maneuver, the Supreme Court, in fact, determined the outcome of the race. And my real point is that if this happened in any other country, we would express outrage.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court chose a makeshift democracy. We would not support as legitimate elections if the people's will was subjugated by a group of 7 to 9 judges.
So what do you think of his chances next year?
Well, he has the infrastructure. He has the inside track. He is the president. Presidents can maneuver information. They can do little stimuli for job creation. They can do things. But unless something happens real fast, he cannot manipulate our coming out of Iraq with honor and a victory.
Right.
He cannot manipulate an economic turnaround that will bring us more jobs. The data and the stats might change, but if you have a recovery without jobs,
Right.
it's no recovery at all. If you say we're more secure, if you're losing more lives in Iraq and Afghanistan every day, it does not pass the smell test.
So it would be a repeat of the Bush Senior's experience.
It could very well be, because many Americans who voted for him the last time around, who like him, they can't afford him. He's too expensive. His trade policies are not helping these workers. You know, if America played in China and Japan and France and Britain are in the athletic Olympics, and there's a 100-yard dash, or there's a shot put, or there's a basketball game, we make certain that for all players, the distances are the same.
Yep.
The shot put is the same weight. The basketball rules are the same. And in that athletic Olympics, we accept winner and loser. Good guys, won, and the other guys, you win next time. And you leave with a sense of joy, winners and losers, gold medal, silver medal, and all of that. And the reason why those events are so successful is because the playing field is even.
The playing level is...
Rules are public.
Is it
and the goals
level
are
this
clear.
time?
Well, in athletics they are.
But in politics?
But the rules are not even in access to education, access to health care, access to drinkable water, access to capital, even access to the voting booth. And so our struggle in the human rights movement is to defend, protect, and gain human rights, and to even the playing field. The bottom 5, 6 of the world, where the AIDS is such a killer, where you don't have drinkable water, we don't have adequate food, people survive off of $2 or less a day. We must somehow have a fairer distribution of wealth and resources to those persons. That's the key to security. It's also anti-terrorism. It's also the morally right thing to do.
Among the Democrats, the 9 candidates, are you going to endorse any of them?
It's premature.
When are you going to make up your mind?
Well,
have you made up your mind?
Well, I'm giving all of them critical assessment, but right now I have no particular interest in doing that, because I think that their activism right now, they're generating interest, and they're creating competition, they're raising issues.
Your position could influence their chances too. If you say today you endorse a certain candidate, then he or she might have a better chance than waiting until...
Well, at some appropriate time that I will determine, I might make such a decision.
You will?
Yeah, because the fact is that...
Do you see any real candidate who can beat Bush now?
I think that Dean, Gephardt, Kerry, and Clark stand a real chance.
3 or 4 of them.
The upper tier, they have raised the money, they have the infrastructure, they have the background as seen as being presidential. Dean has taken an early lead because he has been so unequivocal against the war. And every day, as more Americans are killed, and we can't find the weapons of mass destruction, we don't see the imminent threat, it makes him look, you know, an even more formidable foe.
Right.
He raised questions early on about Bush's tax cut not being fair and not being adequate. Well, he's proven to be right, and he seems to have touched a nerve in young America and many independents. And he's a very bright doctor, governor of a state, and so right now he has to lead, and for those reasons.
Bill Clinton is not supporting any particular candidate either.
He seems not to be officially, though he has very strong ties with General Clark.
Yeah.
But so far he has chosen not to get involved in the middle of a given campaign, and he'll determine just how early he will cast his support.
How do you assess General Clark's chances?
Well, he has a very strong resume, having been a commander in NATO, a very bright student at West Point. He has a lot of, quote-unquote, the right stuff, but somehow it is not yet resonating. It's like in '84 when Senator Glenn ran.
Yeah.
A movie came out about him, The Right Stuff. He had been to the moon. He was a U.S. senator, but somehow it never connected. It never got traction. And so far, there was a big hype about General Clark coming in.
Yeah, because of the war and
all of that
his experience. Yeah.
But so far, it has not created popular resonance. But he is a strongly credentialed man, and he'll be in the mix of this to the end, in my judgment.
What have you heard about Hillary Clinton running or not running? She said she's running, but still a lot of people think maybe not this time, but next time.
I think she probably won't run. She has immense popularity. She won the Senate seat against great odds.
Yep.
And I think that she is establishing herself as a force within the Senate and within the country, because she brings this combination of having been the First Lady.
Yeah.
And seen as not just a passive partner, but an active, progressive political force. And so she was able to leverage that visibility into winning that seat. And then by her voting record has done an outstanding job. And so she has great appeal. But the right wing is very hostile.
Yeah, right within the party.
Within the country, not so much
Not
the
in
party.
the party, right.
Very hostile toward her. And I think so far she is simply getting more footing in the Senate. You can never tell when she would make a different kind of move, and I don't like to spend my time speculating
But you're close
about well, I am close to them, but my interest, frankly, there are 2.2 million Americans in jail in America.
Yeah.
That's my focus. There are 950,000 black men in jail, 600,000 in college. That's my focus. 50 million Americans have no health insurance.
Yeah, but your focus in politics is not to make sure that your country has the first black president? Never occurs to you?
Well, that is important. But with black or female or Asian or Latino, that person must have the capacity to raise the consciousness of America, to raise enough money to create an infrastructure, to get enough delegates to win the convention.
Yes.
I mean, and at some point in time that will happen. That's not happening now. The issue at this point for us is we're fighting an extreme isolationist government.
Yeah.
That's engendering so much bitterness toward our country. Its foreign policy is dangerous, divisive, expensive, and not working. Its domestic policies has begun to sink the middle class, losing their houses, mortgage lending record, foreclosures, for example, jobs coming down, tuition going up. That's chaos. And so whoever can put forth the best case to change our direction should be supported, and in my judgment, that will happen in a month or so.
Do they have to accommodate your platform to get your support?
Well, and that is happening. After all, those who are running almost to a person are challenging our misadventure into Iraq and breaking with the global coalition. They all agree that that was a bad thing to do, or a mistake. Almost to a person, they agree that we must stimulate our economy bottom up and not just top down. They, to a person, agree that we must regain our stature in the world community as the umbrella, as the embracer, and not as the bully. They understand that view of world politics. So I see today as there's a growing consensus, whether it is affirmative action for women and people of color, or whether it is a foreign policy that's not foreign to our values, or new economic priorities. There's a kind of drift, a good drift in that direction.
A lot of people must have told you that Reverend Jesse Jackson, to solve all these problems that you mentioned, you have to be on top in politics. You have to be president. So you cannot give up that hope yet.
Well, not necessarily. You know,
have people told you that? Have your advisors told you that?
Some have said that.
Yeah.
But you know, Dr. King didn't run for public office.
No.
Helped influence American public policy. Mandela changed South African policy from jail. Gandhi didn't run for public office. And so public office is a way to change the course of a country. But sometimes mobilizing the masses, because often when the masses are motivated to move, they change political leaders in ways leaders do not change the masses. And so I'm spending much of my work now. If I were running for president today, I couldn't be in Thailand.
Right.
I couldn't be here mobilizing peace forces in the world. I couldn't have been really in many other places I want to be, whether it's South Africa or whether it's China.
But you could get American troops out of Iraq.
And we're going to do that anyhow.
You could meet Castro as president, and you could change the course of history.
Well, in America, of course, being president is a very powerful position. And, well, it's not the only factor involved, but race is a huge factor in winning the office. And that is a big deal to consider, can you win? I know I could govern. I know I could motivate the people. But getting the resources to win would be a big deal. But I don't walk around broken-hearted because of that, or dispirited because of that. I've tried to find a way to meaningfully serve and to spread hope.
Right.
And to build coalitions. Our work in 84 and 88 really made Clinton's victory in 92 possible.
Yep.
The new voters that we brought in, the coalition that we built, those forces in 84 changed the Senate in 86. Those forces in 88 enabled the Democrat to win in 92. So I feel fulfilled about the role I now serve as president.
What's the next step?
Well, I'm president of the Rainbow Push Coalition.
Yeah.
We built a...
And PUSH stands for People United
to serve
humanity.
Serve humanity. And Rainbow Push. In Rainbow, America really is a rainbow. You see it as monochrome, as kind of white. America is Asian, and it's African American, it's Latino, it's Native American. It is in many ways it is a rainbow. It's as the world is, and it is our job in some sense to tell. There may be some Americans now who are Thai Americans, or who are Japanese Americans, who are Australian Americans, and those groups by themselves feel inadequate to be change agents. But in a coalition of shared values, that coalition has the power to determine the course and priorities of our country. And that's why it's significant to come to a place like Thailand to get a sense of the feeling here. I mean, there's Thailand here, there's Burma next door, there's Vietnam next door, there's China next door, there's Indonesia. Today, the Asian factor, the economic conditions in this part of the world, the labor conditions for workers, the child labor conditions in this part of the world, the sense of very bright people on the one hand, very impoverished on the other. The Asian factor is driving much of the world's agenda by its sheer size. I mean, half of the human race is Asian.
Yeah.
And so now as walls come down and bridges are built and technology links us in the new world order, Asia will be a major, if not the most major factor in that new equation.
So Asia will feature quite prominently in your Rainbow Push campaign.
Oh, it does, because...
So far, Asia has not been really that significant in your campaign, right?
No, it's been very in my campaign, yes. I mean, my director of our California operations is Asian American, Butch Wing, and 1/8 of all Americans live in California. When we ran in 84 and 88, I mean, the Asian factor became a big deal, in part because many Asian Americans are being attacked because of the Japanese car factor. The Americans are reacting angrily to Japanese cars, and they had some Americans shooting cars, auto side, losing their minds. Vincent Chin, young American, was beaten to death in America. He was Chinese, so we thought he was Japanese. I mean, it's a real anti-Asian, but that's given way now to a more rational set of relationships. But within our coalition, we know that we must see anew Asia and Africa and India and Pakistan. America is just 6% human race, 6%. And it can help direct the world through values. It can't rule it with guns.
Right.
And in the days to come, what do we have to offer the world? Great universities, great technology, great capital formation. We have strengths to share, and if we share those strengths at home and abroad, we'll be a force for good.
But we don't want your junk food culture. We don't want your junk food culture, fast food culture,
That's
which is
not-
spreading around the world.
Yeah, that is, a feature of American, culture, fast
Yeah.
foods. But we have more to offer than that.
Mm-hmm.
We have scientific know-how.
Mm-hmm.
We have great universities. We have stable government. We have a huge talent base. One of the genius of America, frankly, is that it has drawn talent from all around the world. I mean, many of the brightest people from around the world gravitate to America, and they're able to have Chinese Americans can relate to China.
Mm-hmm.
Japanese Americans can relate to Japan. African Americans to Africa. French Americans to France. In some sense, we become the connection point to the world. So on our best days, we are trilingual.
Mm-hmm.
On our best days, we are multiracial, we're multicultural. On our best days, we are that. On our worst days, we're isolationists. On our best days, we are involved people who help to determine. Does it really matter that the cure for AIDS come from Burma or Washington?
Yeah.
Does it really matter that the way to get drinkable water comes from Thailand or comes from Moscow?
Right.
And the way the world is made, no one country has a monopoly on these talents and skills. God seems to endow people in the strangest places the powers of healing. So one day you look up and there's a crisis, and of all places, Vietnam, a world crisis. The world crisis is in Iraq.
Right.
But not too long ago in America, the kickoff for our civil rights struggle in this era was Montgomery, Alabama, not New York, Birmingham, Alabama, not Chicago. So these good things and these challenges can come from very unsuspected places. And all it really proves to me, and I close, is that we're inextricably bound one to the other, and the good is never lost. And that you really cannot hurt somebody anywhere without hurting people everywhere. And you tend to lose when you're hurt. You tend to gain when you heal. And that's somewhat our challenge.
Would your theme include anti-terrorism too?
Of course, anti-terrorism. But in many ways, people who go to bed at night without drinking water are living under terror. Denying resources to people is a form of terror to them. They live threatened by AIDS, threatened by air they can't breathe, threatened by joblessness, threatened by lack of education. And so they live in a tinderbox every day. And somehow we must relieve people of those fears so you can have drinkable water. You can have a cure to AIDS. You can have hospital care.
In other words, basic needs first.
Yeah, you can work and get wages. You can work and have job security. You can overcome child labor laws. You can end child prostitution. You can begin. We should be fighting these great ills. And more weapons cannot fight them. We have the most bullets and bombs, except bullets and bombs will not feed the hungry. Will not even defend you against terrorism as we know it today. This phenomenon of suicide, bombing, and terrorism is a devastating form of warfare.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced we must stop it when we see it coming. Most time we don't see it coming.
No.
But its breeding ground are the areas of desperation in the world. We must make those for people who are the most desperate, the most secure. Security is a key. How we treat people, making people secure is a key to world security. What? Making people secure is a key to world security.
So you don't subscribe to the so-called clash of civilizations. Professor Huntington was saying that this is a clash between the West and the rest, the West and the religious.
No, I think it may be a tension between those who live in the surplus and those who live in desperation. When I flew from,
you don't think of religious conflicts. You don't think this is a clash between.
There are some tensions there, but when I flew from Chicago to L.A., Hong Kong to Bangkok, I saw Thai Airlines and I saw American Airlines, I saw Cathay Pacific Airlines and Ethiopian Airlines, and all these planes from around the world, from around the world are trained in one aeronautical science.
Yeah.
These planes could fly safely because of one set of air rules, the kind of internationalization of air traffic control, and aeronautical science training.
Yeah.
And that, in many ways, that's really a metaphor for the whole world.
It's a global thing.
That's right. So that was no hitch based upon religion, or hitch based upon race, or based upon. I mean, we flew from east to west, and we fly from west to east. We fly from north to south.
Yeah.
So I think that often even the civilizational crisis, there are different civilizational angles, but the values, whether you close your eyes, if you wake up in Indonesia or in Alabama, if you are in Mississippi or if you are in Australia, all people want basically the same thing, the right to breathe free, the right of freedom of expression, the right to a decent meal, the right to educate their children, the right to coexist. And the languages may be different, but the messages are the same. So I think we should stop looking for, reasons not to come together. I say let's build bridges, two-way bridges, and create a secure future.
In the debate about the American role getting too big, some critics say, back in the States, you still have racism. Equality is still not there. The black people are still mistreated by the white people back home. Is that true?
It is true. But the genius of America is constitutional. We have the right to fight for the right. But we have the right to express ourselves. We have the right to write. We have the right to
protest.
The right to protest. We have the right to vote. We have the right to build coalitions. Within that context, you can bring about change without having to resort to violence. Because when you cannot express yourself, then violence becomes your expression. So America can be changed fundamentally. Next year, we can change the president. We can change the Attorney General. We can change the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. We can do all of that by voting and not by shooting. And in some sense, that becomes the genius of America's survival.
Racial equality in the past 10 years in the States, has it improved or not?
There have been some setbacks. Mr. Bush, for example, and the Attorney General Ashcroft has not met with the Congressional Black Caucus, 38 black Congress people. All the NAACPs, civil rights organizations, or organized labor, not one time in 3 years a closed-door policy. That's not a good thing. I mean, the lack of access to the White House, the lack of access to the Department of Justice is really mean-spirited and very ideological. But that's not very typical.
Those are exceptions.
Yeah, exceptions. I mean, up front, even in the war, you have General Brooks as the spokesman, the African-American. You have John Sanchez and the Hispanic spokesman. Then you have Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell.
Colin Powell,
been the spokespersons for this war and this policy. But beneath that veneer of leadership, more blacks have lost their jobs. We're disproportionately in jail. When you get almost 1 million young black men in jail and 600,000 in college, that is suggestive of something is going awry. And there's not the adequate dialogue to address that within our country. But again, we still have the right to fight. And in the coming year, you look across the South, every election that was lost last year by Democrats, by civil rights devotees, we lost by the margin of less than unregistered black voters or uninspired black voters. So now as we ally black voters and Hispanic voters and workers, we have the power. Through all of our challenges, we have the power. Unlike the rest of the world, we can elect an American president. And our vote matters. In 1960, Kennedy beat Nixon.
How significant is the black vote?
1960, Kennedy beat Nixon by 112,000 votes, less than one vote per precinct. We determined the winner. In 68, we lost to Nixon by 500,000 votes. Dr. King had been killed, Robert Kennedy had been killed, despair was a factor. In 92 and 96, both Dole and Bush got more white votes than Clinton.
Okay.
Clinton got more white, black, and brown votes than they got, and he won. So our vote or non-vote determines presidents, and the Congress and the Senate. And so with that leverage, we fight with hope.
Do the American people in general appreciate what you're doing?
Well, I think so.
You have your critics too?
Indeed.
People don't
because
like you. Some people don't like you too, right?
when you fight for civil rights, it's always uphill. I mean, Dr. King was assassinated.
Yeah.
Like Gandhi was assassinated. Like Mandela was jailed. Like Jesus was crucified.
Do you
those
live in fear of getting assassinated too?
No, it's possible, but I don't live in that fear because it would paralyze me. I couldn't do my work. I'm driven by hope and dreams, not controlled by fear, because it paralyzes. But when you fight to change, to include more people, or when you fight to even out the playing field, it's always a countercultural struggle.
Sure.
But then one can say that suffering breeds character, and character breeds faith.
How do you deal with
And in the end, faith will prevail. And so I have an undaunted faith in the human family.
How do you deal with people who don't like you, who write books about you in a bad way, who come up with stories that are negative about you?
Well, often I seldom do I read them, number one.
You don't read them?
Seldom do I read them.
The book
And
called Shakedown, you read that?
Sometimes I read them. I'm always able to compartmentalize the critics because particularly that sometimes critics are very helpful.
Yeah.
Their observation can help you sharpen up your point of view. But sometimes critics are poisoned by their own motives. And I have to make a distinction between critics that help and critics whose motive it is to discredit, disrupt, and destroy.
Yeah.
One time, Jesus healed a blind man. That was a phenomenal thing. He healed a blind man. The critics said, why'd you do it on Sunday? And by what authority did you do it?
Yeah.
And so, in the meantime, while they were complaining, the blind man was beholding sight. So you had to focus on the new sight, not the old critics.
Yeah.
When I came home from Syria with Lieutenant Robert Goodman in 1984, it was a big deal because Reagan had said, you shouldn't go, but I can't stop you from going. And if you go and don't get him, it proves you don't know what you're doing.
All right.
If you bring him back, bring him to the White House. It was quite a deal he put out there. So we brought him back home.
Yeah.
And I felt that we'd done something good. We brought the American soldier back home.
Yeah.
We met with Assad. We negotiated with Assad. I got Reagan to call Assad on the phone. The two of them talked. It's like a big deal.
Yeah.
The press asked, who paid the hotel bill? Now,
Okay. Did you feel very irritated by those questions?
I just dismissed it. I considered the source.
Yeah.
Because I really feel that in the end, that you must go forward by grace. If you need thanks, you almost don't deserve it.
Yeah.
If you deserve it, you really don't need it. In other words, when I brought those Americans home from jail in Cuba and Iraq and Syria and Yugoslavia, only one of them have ever sent a Christmas card to say thank you.
Only one.
Only one.
So they didn't appreciate your help.
It seems it didn't. But I would do it again because it is the oxygen of grace, the goodness of God.
Yeah.
The oxygen of grace, not the carbon dioxide of thanks. I don't require thanks to do what I do. I require the opportunity to serve, and I found that in service, I find joy and fulfillment. I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you
you,
very
sir.
much, sir.
All right.